I hope you guys are ready for part 2 of this deep dive into not only Patience Xina's channel, but also my thoughts surrounding Western political ideology in reference to the left, the right, and the center. Before diving in though, I wanted to take a moment to address one particular question that I've gotten multiple times, and that question is, what is the left? This question is normally asked to me in two ways. One being the person sees that many of my own ideas seem to align with the left, so they're confused or uncertain as to why I refuse to support the side. Or two would be in the same vein of attempting to dissuade any talking points I have if my perspective of the left, or who are leftist individuals or pundits, do not align with their own. In other words, it comes off as a disingenuous question that is more than likely rooted in irritation that I am highly critical of the left. My viewpoint of the left revolves around the internet because in real-world politics, which I will discuss my involvement in near the end of this video, these types of messages that we commonly see online are not impactful, nor do they yield substantial results because there is often no widespread support of them. This is why you'll hear me say the online left in most scenarios, because I'm referring to that reality as well as the fact that most individuals outside of the internet do not participate in radical politicking. So this would beg the question, who is the online left? Well, it is a wide array of people and spaces, from video essayists like Noah Sampson, FD Signifier, Khadija Mambo, and ContraPoints, to debate streamers like Vosh, Destiny, or Demon Mama. We can also expand it to booktubers like Reads with Rachel, who is actually one of the few people I see physically participating in real-world politics. There's also a plethora of TikTokers out there, of course, none of whom I can remember the names of, quite honestly, in this moment, but because the left is only a political ideology, the principles and values of it can be detected and seen within multiple forms of content. You have your streamers like Hassan, girlboss video essayists like Illuminati, who I do know is currently involved in controversy, but she is certainly a leftist. We can observe leftist ideology within obviously politically engaged creators, both big and small. The methods of arguing and talking points are very similar across all platforms, as should be expected. There's a number of variances, of course, amongst all these people, but they are all tangibly leftist or left-leaning. But aside from these prominent speakers, I can also observe the communities they create by reading their comment sections and stream chats. You can learn a lot about any political faction based on how the audience is responding, and leftists have a lot to say, to the point where some of them cannot tolerate any bit of criticism from anyone outside of their in-group, especially when they can't write that person off as a conservative or a bigot. Offline, the leftist agenda, we'll say, is very pervasive in academia to a borderline obnoxious extent. And because I am a highly formally educated person, I am very familiar with that content and material. If you watch any of my videos that are politics-centric, I think I do a pretty good job of describing and presenting leftist beliefs and ideals when I'm referring to them. To the people asking me the question of who is the left, your problem probably isn't who I determined to be the left. Your problem is more than likely related to the fact that I am heavily scrutinizing the left, but your arguments of assumed bigotry and ignorance do not work here, so you're frustrated. Because you do not trust me. You do not trust that I'm coming from a place of empathy or support, so you fight against me even if there's no true cause to do so. And make no mistake, your assumptions of a lack of empathy and support are 100% correct. But that doesn't mean I have malicious intention either. I'm just a very opinionated person, much like how many of you are. So for now, try to enjoy the video, but as a forewarning, while I will heavily be focusing on centrism in this video essay, it is also riddled with criticism for the left. My ambivalence, apprehension, or distrust for the left does not solely come from the claimed principles in and of themselves, though there are many that I do not agree with, nor does it come from a place of hatred towards leftist people. It is because the left is, indeed, a political faction. For that reason alone, I will always approach it with caution. I refuse to yield on my core values of not hailing to a political or governing structure, or any man-made paradigm for that matter, simply to make some of my leftist audience members feel more comfortable with me. The audience I have grown so far exceeds the titles of political affiliation, in my opinion. You guys typically thoughtfully consider different perspectives and bring about great discussions. That goes for those who agree with me and those who do not. I appreciate all of you, not because of your political affiliations, but because you continuously show that you think. The left and the right are fraternal twins. The factions derive from the same mothering system, and they are both very scrupulous in their own rights, and they are both hell-bent on survival and are willing to manipulate the general populace in order to do so. What tends to save the left for many people is the intense focus on protecting minority groups, whether that be religious groups like the Jewish or Muslims, people who are disabled, or people who are struggling with their mental health, anyone. There's a standard of valor of sorts that the left wants to maintain, and it keeps those of us who fundamentally reject the current political structure on the side or within allyship of the left. Because of the left's claim of wanting to attack systemic concerns, it should be very unsurprising that centrism for them is not enough. Centrism features a lot of different facets. People who see both the left and the right as extremists, people who see both sides as equally valid or equal in points made, people who hold baseline values of certain isms and phobics are bad, but still question the notion of things like systemic oppressions, critical race theory, and allowing trans kids to transition safely without scrutiny. Centrists tend to pride themselves on leading with logic and fact, and not adhering to either side of the spectrum while hearing out both sides, because they hold that this is the best way to achieving the idea of free thinking and seeing outside of one's own bias. That is my general neutral analysis of centrists. From both her own descriptions and through watching her content, Patience falls under the title of a centrist politically. And here I will be transversing the lines between the United States and England a bit more. Unlike most leftists, I don't find centrists to be inherently immoral, mostly because I don't find myself caring too much about something as superficial and malleable as morality. I do, however, find most centrists to be inconsistent due to the contradictory nature of their position as it stands within modern society. I find them to be quite contrarian at times, because it would seem that any strong level of agreement with either side, particularly the left in most cases, comes at the great cost of their free thinking identity. I also find them to be very hard to argue with, and that is not because their points are of sound logic or because I am unprepared or presenting inaccurate information. I find it hard logically to argue with someone who does not appear to have strong or steadfast beliefs in anything. And I say appear intentionally, because I do think that they do have strong beliefs. You are human. And unless you lack a soul, any level of empathy, or a pure disinterest in logic and reasoning, you have strong opinions on at least one or two societal level topics. Centrists tend to jade their strong beliefs because that, to them, is weakness. They cannot stand proud and tall on any issue, or I guess offense would be more befitting in this situation, because they think that will make them seem wavering. The lack of conviction in centrists is why I think they are dragged through the mud by everyone. To participate in politics, to engage with social ideas, you must have conviction, no matter where it comes from, bigoted or not. You gotta have it. You gotta have it, or no one's gonna take you seriously. When a centrist says, hey, racism is real, but it's not as prevalent as it once was, and there's no evidence of systemic oppression, or something like the Christian religion is a net positive for the world, but we should not encourage its continued imperialism. Both leftists and rightists will abandon them on both points. Centrists and moderates paint this abandonment as what happens when you reject the extremes, but really it's just them half agreeing with one side for the sake of the illusion of good faithedness to the other. No one likes a fence sitter because historically they cannot be trusted. Further, some of them have an air of superiority because they bounce around different standpoints and try to claim having a perspective that is untainted by political affiliation. They will blow whichever way the tide is turning as long as it provides them with protection, or conversely, as long as it keeps them on the out group. The irony of this is that they will still play off of the perspectives of the two groups they desperately want to stray away from instead of developing a truly original standpoint. The lack of respect that is given to centrists by leftists typically hinges on the reluctance to extend empathy, understanding, compassion, support, whatever you want to call it, to marginalized groups. The way I see it, the Western political spectrum ranges in a lot of different ways, obviously, but things like hyper-individualism and a strong adherence to the American dream and hyper-communal or socialist values fall on the far right and the far left, respectively. Those types of issues alone, without context, in my opinion, are fine to fall in the middle ground of. For example, I am an individualist. I don't desire for a community, but at the same time, I understand that I am a part of many different communities. The Black community, the West African community, the Muslim community, women, Black women, natural hair community, and so on and so forth. Community is valuable and understandable and needed, even if I typically prefer solitude. Being a part of groups have helped manipulate and shape our perspectives and also give us insight in our group's own treatment and proximity to certain societal aspects. Being a part of an ousted group gives you a perspective that forces you to see reality in a manner that is more bleak and tainted than that of a more privileged person who can walk around with shields over their eyes because they haven't been ripped off yet. I'm not saying centrists always reject how valuable community can be, but I am saying they tend to make an assumption that it is something that can only be beneficial to the individual, rather than appreciating it as something that is beneficial to society at large. White people would have never understood the lasting atrocities of theft of land, colonialism, chattel slavery, had it not been for the people of color telling them so. Cisgendered people would have never known the realities of the trans experience unless we were told so. Able-bodied individuals would never understand how many unnecessary barriers are put in place against the disabled unless we were told so. I know we all like to think that we can see past ourselves, and while we most certainly can, most people need to be introduced to the very notion of a different experience before we can ponder it, especially if it is in reference to a group that is not typically very visible or often spoken about. I grew up learning how to challenge the institutions that oppress particularly Black people, brown Muslims, and Latino people, but it took me years to understand how these systems of oppression affect the indigenous and Polynesian people, and how the systems can be even more overtly oppressive to them at times. And I was only introduced to that subject at all because I fortunately have thoughtful, diverse friend groups that check my ignorance. That being said, marginalized communities and groups probably have the biggest burden in Western societies. They inform others. They offer new, diverse perspectives that, kind of make us look like an asshole at times, but it is necessary. This is what centrists seem to neglect an understanding of. We don't know everything. We don't consider everything. So listen when needed. So to Patience's video regarding white supremacy not being needed in all conversations, people of color have a borderline responsibility to analyze every single issue that even somewhat intertwines with society or political or governing structures from a racial lens, because when that check has been ignored for literal centuries, we be disservicing ourselves as people of color and also preventing white people from constantly reckoning with an implicit bias. And let's just address this dead on right here. England also suffers from institutionalized, systemic, and structural racism. It ain't just an American thing, so stop it. But to my American, and hell, even to my Canadian audience members, do not let English creators play off of your ignorance anymore and make you think that large-scale racial issues are just a here thing. No, it is not true, and they rely on you guys knowing nothing about England in order to pass off their blatant ignorance and lies. Okay? It's not to say that white supremacy is always the answer. Maybe it's something more so to do with bureaucracy or economics, but it is to say analyzing it from that lens can lead to the picture becoming a bit more sharper. That is truly what diverse, nuanced, critical thought is. Approaching topics from multiple focal points, not just the lens you deem necessary or valuable simply because you're sick of hearing about race. If you want to engage with the idea of, now what? I'll join you there. Leftists get stuck in conversation. While they are still conversating, the right is acting. I enjoy engaging with intellectual debate and deconstructing properties of society. I like poking fun at the left, but leftist politics in practice do incite a bit more of a vitriolic reaction in me at times, even more so than the right does. Because I grew up in the South, I know the extremities a lot better than most people do. But the left, you guys are supposed to be better. You guys said
you would be better. I have never been one for the hope or belief in the abstract, but I thought for a moment in 2015 when gay marriage was legalized after years of precedent, maybe you guys were onto something, that you would be better than your predecessors. The left, in partnership with Democrats and independents, managed to overturn one of the most controversial legal precedents of our time that was low-key agreed upon across racial, ethnic, and religious groups. Against all odds, the left was able to garnish enough support to legalize gay marriage on the federal level. I don't think people really appreciate how monumental and powerful that moment was, not just for the left or for the LGBTQ community, but for everyone battling against centuries long of accepted precedent of oppression. And even after all of the bullshit that occurred between 2015 to 2019 in online leftist spaces, when you guys started shouting, defund the police, to signal the demands of enforcing additional regulations on the police complex, to introduce a new concept of mental and social aid over intense policing, to advocate for the police to work more closely with community leaders in the areas they serve, I became more intrigued of the left. Despite my reservations with this dumbass political system that I am so vehemently against and abhor. And then the abuse of identity politics begun. Identity politics were not meant to be weapons of destruction. Identity politics should serve as a way to better obtain pluralism and to create a society that is more whole. But people who, and without mincing any words here, people who seem like they have never experienced discrimination to the point of violence, discrimination on a level that stifles your performance in school or at work, or deep-seated convicted prejudice to the point where you start to question your own sanctity and personhood. These people, these online leftists, started vilifying not only the right, but marginalized people that refuse to jump when commanded. The only descriptor I will be giving for those people is online leftists, because I don't connect it to one particular people group. The lack of care towards not only the ideals, but the physical issues at hand like housing, accessibility, education, generational affluence, towards the marginalized that I saw manifesting as the left's militance towards verbiage and speech grew, genuinely irritated me. As the years went on and I watched as the online left grasped onto the appearance of power on the internet, the more apparent to me that it became that these phrases, defund the police, Black Lives Matter, or stop Asian hate, were just another iteration of political dogma and propaganda that had no true real-world actions put behind it. At least not by the online left. The people I saw trying to push for progressive systemic or legal change was not the online left. It was the people on the ground who were actually and truly impacted by these disparities. Are we not done with the illusion of change through cancellations of bad people or demeaning someone who slips up and use outdated wording? To be very frank with you guys, I have seen non-black online leftists get more offended over the N-word than I do. It's important to engage with people individually, but we also have to engage simultaneously with law, policy, and economics. One of the reasons I think it is so hard for idealistic leftists to do this is because the systems of the West actively work against progress and uplift restriction. It is truly hard to create and reinforce almost preemptive policies in America because the system really wasn't constructed for that purpose. It's not impossible, it just requires more education, more thought, and more active political actions than what is currently seen. Simply put, we need more than just ideals and philosophy. We need more concrete plans for action. And I think centrists know that, actually. I think they are aware and probably believe at least this small portion of this video. Generally speaking, I think they know that the system is failing, but also don't know how to engage within the current limitations of it very thoughtfully, or at least as thoughtfully as we possibly can. And that's where we deviate. Centrist and I, that is, but I'll discuss that more at the end. The people that leftists deeply dislike or heavily criticize, like Obama, Sanders, or AOC, surprisingly enough, it seems to be because they do not think that these politicians are doing enough, that they're compromising too much. They may have some of the social values of leftism, but aren't showing or haven't shown it through policy and true change. But what these politicians are doing is a reality of this system, and that reality is if you do not compromise under bipartisanism, when you are trying to take the position of uplifting the marginalized and striving for equity, if you don't compromise, you will not see change. I don't think that all of these Democratic politicians who, by the way, I know that leftists don't actually consider them leftists, but whatever. I think they do it because they are at the disadvantage when it comes to supporting the marginalized. Some of them, not all. but they're trying to manipulate a system that was not built in their favor. I'm not saying leftists should just accept that, but I am saying that you guys aren't being honest with yourselves if you think that you don't have to play within that same system. None of us will probably live to see the day where capitalism or bipartisanism is going to be overhauled in the West. That day will probably never come. Centrists know that this is a game, political theater, but they also ignore that real people, real groups are being targeted and hurt as collateral. There's not really a very affluent way for me to wrap up this section, so I'll just end it with the title of this section. The right disgusts me, but the left has always disappointed me. Let's move on. Patience has been accused by many of being a grifter because the content she makes is, well, I find it to be uncritical, unsubstantiated, and either disingenuous or tempered to a point of inauthenticity. But because her content is considered at times to be lackluster with lazy, unthoughtful arguments, many of the left would assume she is doing this intentionally to feel the bias of her audience in order to quickly build a platform for profit. Part of these arguments are centered on Patience being a Western Black woman, because how could she? I've already dove into how I perceive this issue from the position of a person of color, but let's talk about the semantics of this argument from those making it. To tell someone of a particular identity that they or their opinions are less than or hypocritical for the sole factor of their perspective being contrary to the left's take is synonymous with stripping someone of their individuality and personhood. In other words, the argument is sometimes that Patience is Black, so therefore she should care about Black issues in the same way that you do, or the same way that I do. And if she does not, she is a coon or a grifter. The desire to lift yourself above Patience because of her identity and her lack of following the leftist script can indicate that you may have some internalized misunderstandings you perhaps need to sort through. Black people are not a monolith, and that is said so often that I feel like the phrase has really lost its meaning. So let's explain it. Patience's experiences are different from my own. Not just because we wear our hair differently, or because she's more feminine than I am, or because I'm American and she's English, because she's moderate and I'm a degenerate. We are not different because of the labels society puts onto us or the labels that we choose to don, or because of our physical, political, or expressional differences. It is because we are solely different people. We don't think the same, we don't analyze the same, we don't speak the same, because we are not the same, despite our commonalities. I don't deem Patience's word to be less than because she does not agree with me on political issues. I do not put expectations on Patience solely because she is Black, nor do I hold her to a higher expectation because of that factor. But most of the politically engaged do, meaning both the left and the right. The right does this more in a figurehead manner, but the left does so in a way that it almost feels like they're trying to remind us of our place on the totem pole at times. Because at the end of the day, in order for any political faction to move forward, there must be cohesion in its purpose along with tight-lined boxes. When certain groups act and show that they are not monolithic, it challenges that political purpose and that goal. That tends to be why systems like anarcho-socialism really only work in small, like-minded communities of people who share the same core values. Under the guise of trying to uplift marginalized groups, people who use this type of argumentation try to stamp out something that I really appreciate about these groups. Patience has said things that many would deem as insensitive, as disingenuous, as divisive, as bad-faithed, but she is ultimately her own person who I will assume is building a platform based on her own ideas and her own volition. It does nothing to sit here and gauge whether or not she truly believes what she is saying, because she's already saying it. We can engage with the words that are coming out of her mouth and tear her conclusions apart without using reductive, borderline racist argumentation. And it is borderline racist because what are we saying here? That Black people cannot have contrary beliefs for no other reason besides a white person told them to? We can be uninformed on our own, damn it. But seriously, trust that what Patience is saying is her, that it is real, and that it is authentic. Take her and all political commentators as they are, and as they present themselves. I've called myself apolitical on this platform many times because it's simplistic. But the truth is, I cannot think of one point in my life since my early teenage years that I have not been political. I was a flag-burning, loud-ass anarcho-syndicalist at one point. I've studied political science and history. I'm currently studying law. I've interned and worked for both state and local level politicians and officials. I've lobbied, I've protested, I've compared Western systems to that of the East before Western invasion just to see if there is something different afoot depending on the context of where you are in the world. And the reality is that through all that, I am politically nihilistic. No matter what system is employed, no matter how we try to manipulate politics and law, I don't believe we will ever reach a point of true equality. And that is for a variety of reasons that I will someday talk about in video form. But even as I say that, that doesn't mean that I've ever stopped wanting or striving for better. It's why I align myself with marginalized communities, not the left, not the right. As a Black woman in the United States, politically, I am perpetually exhausted, but I don't care. There's no true logical reason as to why I operate against my nihilism, even though I am content within nihilism. I have no hope for humanity and definitely none for any political or economic systems. I don't believe Marxism or any other forms of socialism or capitalism are the answers to our problems. I don't think leftism, modernism, or rightism offer viable solutions either. I'm not yet sure what I think the best way to fix our social and economic problems would be. The best thought that I've gotten to thus far is keeping the baseline and root of American systems, like the bare skeleton of it, and adding more regulatory practices to it. But I also don't care that I don't have the big answer of how to fix everything. I don't need to logic my way or reason my way into why I strive for the things that I do. I don't desire or need a set ideology or a set of principles to adhere to. I fight, I argue, I listen. Because I want to. Because I want better for the people who are not heard. All this to say, lefties, engage more thoughtfully with centrists. Stop writing them off as pawns of the right. Those are the people that you can and need to convince. And centrists, it's not free thinking if you're operating within the limited confines of an established system. Engage more honestly with yourselves. I'm not a leftist, certainly not a centrist, but I will always concede that we are in this together. Thanks for watching.